Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Today, I'm going to talk about the work that I've been doing in a team. I set up a research team for material design, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what material design is. And during this talk, you are welcome to use or look at your favorite device because it'll I've done for most of my career, like many people here, is in human-computer interaction, which of course brings together cognitive psychology and ergonomics, and design and art, as well as computer science and social and organizational psychology. I'm going to focus today very specifically on the cognitive psychology aspects of this layout, because that is very much what my everyday is about. So just wanted to give you some context there. My background originally was in psychology. So what I'm hoping to show you today is how that background in psychology has really had an effect on the way that I set up the research team for the design system of material design. So as I say, your devices, one of the things that we need to do in design is to think about how people move from one form factor to another, and to think about how to keep things consistent across those form factors, so that for people, we are not trying to learn a new interface over and over and over again. We are actually scaffolded to move from one context to another. And that involves a lot of visual and structural design, and also, of course, a lot of development work to make sure that people are able to even, for example, rotate their screens and so forth. So very much research, design, and engineering collaboration. And one of the things we know from interviewing developers and designers who do a lot of UX engineering is that people will come and say, goodness, here's an experience I want to design or create, and there's no code for this yet, and there's no real guidance. And people are concerned about user testing, and they're also concerned about getting user feedback. And so what design systems do is take all of that knowledge that we have as designers, psychologists, human-computer interaction professionals, and codify that knowledge into guidelines that can be used, into guidelines that everybody can partake in, and that designers and developers can use in their everyday. So a design system is a system of guidelines and engineered components that have the form, the shape, the line, the texture, the color, and space and movement and motion on any of these devices that you use every day. This is the page for material design, which is material.io, which is Google's design system. The concept of design systems came about 2011 and really has taken off. And material design, Google's design system, was started around 2014. And it's one of the biggest design systems out there, used by hundreds of thousands of designers and developers, because it's open source, as well as being internal to Google. And I apologize for my camera. It's doing some jumping around. I'm not sure about why, but I apologize for that. So 95% of Google Android and iOS, both mobile apps, use some aspect of material design, our design system. And that's either using the guidelines or actually using engineered components like the buttons that you click on and so forth. And about 4 million third-party material design apps are in the Play Store. So you can see the scale of how many people are actually using this design system. And when I was giving this talk before, or a version of it, a number of people said that they didn't really know what a design system was. So I wanted to throw up some resources for you to say that, you know, there's a lot of resources out there right now. And in fact, there's even a number of these sites like this Design Systems Gallery, where you can go and see lots of different design systems. Material design is Google's design system. However, it's the main one. However, internal to Google, we also have some other design systems that partner with material design. Many large companies have their own design systems, most do. And this is, as I say, getting more and more popular, because then what companies can do is make sure that their users have consistent experiences and very reliable experiences across their suite of products. And as I say, having great research to validate those components or guidelines as being useful or usable is really important. So I set up research for material design about 3 years ago, and drawing on my background in psychology very much. And I think it was one of the first times a real systematic, programmatic approach to evaluating the design system had been created. And as I say, my background is in psychology, cognitive psychology, and a little bit of neuropsychology. And I went on to do a PhD in cognitive science. So I've been drawing on that background all the way through my career, but very explicitly in the setup of this research group. And in this talk today, I'm just going to focus on a few examples of how psychology and my psychology thinking has come to bear in thinking about the design system. First, from a sort of perceptual point of view, then thinking about the mental models that people have and how we invoke those mental models to get people to take certain kinds of actions. We just heard about motivation in the last talk. This is very much a sort of mental models approach as well. And also I'll finish a little bit with a small example on affect and emotion and how people respond in terms of evaluation to certain aspects of the design system. And the methods, the bottom row is the kinds of methods that we use in the team. We do experiments, lab experiments with a few people, as well as experiments at scale using various tools that I will share with you. We also use surveys, and we do behavioral logging to see, for example, who's coming to the material.io external website. We do a lot of tracking how people come in and how they move through the site. We also do surveys on the site, satisfaction surveys and so forth, to see if people can actually find what they need to do. We also have code labs. So we do a number of evaluations to see if people are using the code labs tutorials and how. So you can see that a lot of these techniques really do draw from our methods toolbox in psychology. So in terms of where we put our energy, today I'm going to really focus on that perception box, but we also look at tasks and interactions and task flows. We heard a little earlier about jobs to be done. And we also do a lot of ethnographic work and institute work to look at how designers and developers and others are collaborating and coming up with designs, how they're doing ideation and interim evaluation, both in the formative stage as well as in the evaluative later stage, coming up with the ideas and evaluating them. But the first thing I want to talk about is metaphor and how the material design system uses metaphor to invite action and interaction. So we are all very familiar with the idea of metaphor in the world of human-computer interaction. This is the original 1984 desktop metaphor, which was very literally trying to recreate with files and folders and a trash can, a bin. And the idea here was to invite or invoke a particular action or interaction based on that mental model, that metaphor, and having people interact with the digital elements as if they were acting with the physical ones. So putting files into folders and putting things into the trash or the bin. So this idea of metaphor has been very much part of HCI and user experience design since the beginning. For material design, a lot of people say to me, oh, are you dealing with materials? No, material is the metaphor. So materiality is the metaphor, drawing on perception and mental models. So here you're seeing one of the original sketches by designers who started the material design system. And the way in which materiality is meant to invoke or call action is through this layering and shadowing. So hopefully you can see a little bit of that shadow, which invites the eye to see what is the most salient thing and what sits behind that salient thing. This is some of the models. This is one of the models, these models that were built by the designers who were the original designers of material design. And they were physical cardboard models to actually start to take light around and photograph how light and shadow would work with different objects or artifacts that might be design elements or components. You can see something that's like a slider there. So they actually built physical objects and photographed them in order to try to figure out how you would render those digitally. So having done that, they started to create physical objects. You might start to recognize this one. So this was in 2014, as I say, when the design system started, and people were really trying to think about how does that metaphor of the physical translate into the digital. And I think many of you might have seen this one. So here again, you see the shadow. And the point of that shadow is to invite a particular action or interaction, but also to sort of create an aesthetic, which is the material design aesthetic. Here you can see something that, again, might look more familiar. It's that idea of when you're interacting with an app, there's a sort of layering that occurs. And the thing that is around what we call a floating action button, that is a call to action. That's where you press, for example, if you were going to create an email in your Gmail account, you would press on a button that sits above everything else. And that sitting above is the perceptual, this is the salient thing, the call to action. Here you can see in maps, this is another older version of what you will see now as maps, but the background is the map itself, and then all of the different elements of that mapping application are layered on top, all the way to the one right on top where those action buttons are. So here again, the perceptual salience and the call to action is used to call somebody to do something, but we're using materiality and layering and shadowing in order to have you perceptually be able to determine where the action is. So if that was just one example of using metaphor to call action, I want to now talk a little bit more about experimentation, because as I say, I wanted to illustrate how the perceptual and the psychological goes into the design process, but then how we also use psychological sort of techniques of evaluation to also do our evaluation. So if you've got the formative stage, now we're more in this sort of evaluative stage. And so I'm sure you've all seen a text field. Here is a classic sort of text field. This one is actually recommended in the material design guidelines online. For designers and developers, if you want to create a text field for text entry, here is the kind of text field that is recommended. And of course, it's not just this one, but this is the sort of direction you might want to go in. And here's how we did evaluation on this. So we worked with a cross-functional team of designers and researchers, interaction design, visual design, and research, and created a whole list of all of the different kinds of text field that you could design, including the box, including the label. Where does the label sit? How big is the box? How long is the box? How salient is the box in terms of the thickness of the lines, etc. And I just wanted to put this up to show that what we were using here was pushing all of the design parameters to start to come up with different conditions to see which one first. So the first thing to do, as always, is to lay out all of the different variable conditions, and that is what we were doing here. So you can see that there's a lot of different parameters to push, from label color to input color, from label placement to different kinds of cases and so forth. And here's where we started to lay out the human perceptual and task-oriented factors that we wanted to look at. So we've got our conditions, and now we have the things that we want to start to look at from the human point of view. So do people know it's a text field? Identifiability or discoverability. Scannability or readability. Can they recognize text fields in a form? I'm sure many of us have gone into a form that's beautifully designed and like, where am I supposed to put the input in? I don't know. Findability. Can you locate a very specific text field? Legibility. Do you understand the content, the states, and the parameters of the text field? And of course, efficiency. Can people correctly and in an efficient way? my next network seems to be slow and it's not letting me go forward, so apologies for that. So these are the human-centered attributes that we started to look at. And I'm just trying to get this to go. Here we go. There we go. And this is a tool that was built by Michael Gilbert on my team. And here, what we did was take all of those parameters and create a tool so that you could click experimenter on different aspects of those text fields and then generate the conditions that you would want. So we could actually just deal with all of these different conditions and create them on the fly. All right, I'm trying to just get this to go forward. It seems to be a bit unstable. Apologies for that. Here are those text fields that have been generated in a form, a particularly ugly form, but I'm sure we've all seen ugly forms as well. So this was one of the conditions we gave people. Now, how did we do this at scale? We used a crowdsourcing platform, Amazon Mechanical Turk, which you can look up here. If you just put in a simple search, Amazon Mechanical Turk and experiments, you can see that we can create different conditions and crowdsource for people to come and take the experiment. So what we did was create multiple conditions and had hundreds, thousands actually of people come in and try out all of the different conditions in just finding text fields, filling forms out, trying to get tasks done. So we did this at scale. These are the sorts of things that we tried with people. And you can see it was like find and click on a given form. We started with really simple tasks and then ended with very complex tasks. We timed everything. We ended up with 144 different sets of alternatives. And then as we'd identified those variables, 144 different alternatives, and then we came up with, at the end, the best contenders, and I'll show you that in a second. In addition to timing, in addition to later satisfaction and qualitative reportage, in addition to task completion under pressure, we also did sort of where people click. So these are essentially heat maps of where these folks, these crowdsourced folks on the Turk platform in our different conditions actually clicked. And you can see on the right, it's a bit more spread out. People were looking for things and clicking a little bit more spread out. So we try to actually understand performance in that way as well. So having run like thousands of people through this and having come up with all of these different conditions, we did a number of analyses, triangulated the data, the qualitative and the quantitative, and came up with a recommendation. In the top, where it says text fields here, that is from the material.io spec site that is externally available with the recommendation. That is the text field that was ultimately recommended, and you can see it on the right-hand side here in situ in an app that you might recognize. So I just wanted to show you there how we're using those kinds of experimental psychology methodologies to really start to test the perceptual, task, and efficiency along those different factors that I shared with you of this particular text field. And this has been taken up and used in many, many, many apps, both internally at Google, but also externally by, as I say, in our open source world, by external designers and developers. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about layout right now. We use the same approach to look at, for example, information density. So here you have two different forms of information density. One is low information, which is from Harry Potter, and the other is a page from James Joyce's Dubliners. I'm literally just talking about the words here, not necessarily the information density of the content, but that would be a whole other interesting thing to talk about. So you can see as we start to unpack that, how these are different. Again, Michael Gilbert and a number of other folks came up with these notions of inner density, which is the degree of compactness of objects within a single container or component. Just like with the text fields, we started to lay out the different kinds of parameters that we were interested in. So outer density is the degree of compactness across multiple containers. As you look at your apps next time, have a look to see how many containers there are and how the information plays together nicely or not. And then there's information density, which is the proportion of pertinent information to all of the information on the page. How much information is actually useful and usable. So here are the results. As I say, we used a similar technique. We used some qualitative and quantitative, some small scale and some large scale experiments. And when you're deciding how dense a design should be, these are the factors that seem to matter the most. The user, we heard in the last talk about motivation, the complexity of the content. One of the things we know is that experts prefer a lot more dense information, for example, spreadsheets and so forth. We heard about banking apps, the complexity of the information, but also the information architecture. So how are people moving through the information, which of course brings in the task context. And our recommendation from our study is to increase the inner and outer, but keep the information density constant. And we have a number of parameters along which we can measure that. So these are just some of the factors and ways of thinking about how you might want to put information into an app that has multiple different locations for information. Finally, I'm going to draw on some work on affect. And here I wanted to show you two examples of a mailing app. And what we were looking at here was the recommendations and guidelines for material around brand and brand perception. And again, picking up from something from Jen's talk, the last talk, here we have affect words. This is just one of many. We looked at a number of different tasks. We had people go through the tasks. We did not put any explicit branding on, but we asked people whether they recognized whether it was Google or not later. And then we had multiple different versions of this survey to look at these affect responses. You know, is it approachable? Is it high quality? Is it intuitive? Is it capable? Does it feel easy to use? Does it feel reliable? So these are kind of sort of emotional responses to things. And we did this with hundreds of different users across multiple tasks with those prototypes that I showed you. And here are just some of the results that pertain to us. But this, again, is a method that I think anyone can use, which was that utility and trust were positively related to us, and people wanted us to be high utility and highly trustworthy as Google apps. And people really think of this as fundamental to the Google brand and fundamental to something that we should maintain investment in. So again, drawing on the psychology, now I know what's left, so I want to just sum up. Say, you know, a background in perceptual psych and thinking about salience, thinking about the metaphor of depth and shadow and how things come to the surface and put shadows over other things is very much a fundamental principle of the material design approach to design apps with different components and elements that we interact with every day. That mental model of, oh, the thing that is at the top is the thing I click on, very integral to the concept of material design. Emotion is very, very important to us as well. And hopefully I've shown you how just a little bit of a flavor of how using and surveys and some behavior from the tasks that we set up, we can start to see which of many, many, many different options in the design space are probably the best for users, for people. One of the things we always say is that this approach does not tell you the right thing to do. It tells you by along the parameters that you have chosen to be most salient, which ones are the most likely to work for the most people. So I think of design systems as codified knowledge to share. It's about scaling the expertise that we have in, you know, psychology and design, so that folks who don't have undergraduates or masters or PhDs or years of experience in the psychology of perception, for example, in this instance, or emotion, they can actually pick up and know that we have validated and tested, and that we're making recommendations around components and how they fit together as in the information density experiments, in ways that have been tested with hundreds, if not thousands of users. And we're just making some recommendations for folks. We also increasingly are publishing the methods that we're using along with the guidelines in the material spec on that material.io site and on our blog. So you'll start to see how we are surfacing the way we're doing the testing so that you can try it at home. And so I just wanted to point out, I just wanted to share this with you because the research is fundamentally methods, and that is sort of deeply integral to everything that we we try to do and we try to share with you all.